to The Truth in Its Art. Thank you for joining me for my conversations bridging arts, culture, and community. I am your host, Rob Lee. And before we start, I'd like to remind you to visit our website, thetruthinitsart.com, for our full archive. That's nearly 800 interviews dating back to 2019. Yeah, we're 5 years in at this point. And definitely worth your attention and time. And it's just a few clicks away. Today, I am privileged to be in conversation with a multidisciplinary artist whose work is influenced by community and human origins, integrating ancestral narratives through painting, portraiture, sculpture, film, and sonic healing. Her multidisciplinary approach creates a unique and immersive experience that fosters introspection and understanding among people. Please welcome Mary Graham. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for making the time, spending some time, and agreeing to talk with me. Like, we have these East and West Coast things. You're really an East Coast. I'm going to give you the East Coast thing. You're West Coast right now, but you're East Coast. We claimed you.
I'm temporarily West Coast, but as the days go by, it becomes not so temporary.
Okay, we're losing you then. We're losing. So to start off, and I'm glad because I've been following some of the stuff, and I'm glad that we were able to make this happen. I've been following you on IG, and that's where I first became aware of you. But for stepping back a little bit, I want to give you the space and the opportunity to introduce yourself in your own words. There is so much power in having folks introduce themselves. We can get into the artist statement, we can get into the haphazardly written bios, but hearing who the person is and what their work is about from them, I think is a little bit more juice in that. So if you will, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work?
Yes. My name is Mary Graham. I consider myself an interdisciplinary artist. But currently I have a focus on painting. I also have a background in singing. I've been classically trained. I sing jazz. I'm really focused on making work exploring the idea of the ancestors. And this is coming from my artist statement, the ancestors as a tool for introspective, interpersonal, and historical insight. So I do that through performance, painting, film, and also sculpture and installation.
Wow. So all of the things.
Well, I'm a contemporary artist. I think most of us are, kind of dipping into many pots. We have many trades. Yeah.
Thank you.
And we're also, we're in service of the concept first and the ideas, and then whatever we need to do to make those ideas happen, that's what we do.
That makes sense, and I appreciate that. I'm always curious to talk with folks, creative folks, with artists, folks that are working in multiple disciplines. And I was sharing with you a little bit, I was teaching today, and I always joke about having the right tool for the job. So last week was my first class, and I came there with all of these different recording devices, and I was like, yeah, it's like picking the right tool. They was like, why do you have so many things? I was like, well, maybe I want to do video here. Maybe this is going to be short form. Maybe this is just 2 people. Maybe this is 6 people. They're like, is it that deep? I was like, it is.
Yeah, it's the right tool for the right job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and thank you for, giving us that context. I think it's a bit more flourish in there than just, artist, but really being able to add a little bit more texture to that. So I think a lot of times some of those early points kind of give us maybe an inkling of the direction that we're going to go into. I remember as a kid, this is not what I do now, but the storytelling part about it, I do, as far as I remember as a kid, I used to embellish what happens in certain movies, but I would always sit on and have a group of people in front of me sharing with my friends. It's like, yeah, man, I bet you know anything about this. I do that kind of now with interviews and like trying to have folks share their stories in a unique way. And I'm kind of framing it. That's what that start kind of looks like for me. I can make those sort of like touch points back to that. For you, what was it? Was an early experience that maybe shaped your perspective on art or your perspective on creativity and the diverse forms in which you work in?
Well, I come from an artist family. My father is a professor of photography, um, and a social practice artist, and my mother works in textiles and fibers. So I had an upbringing where I was surrounded by artists and makers and, kind of people, curators, historians, people like that. So my dad likes to tell a story about how he would carry me through the museums and, when I was a baby and like, he would talk to me about the work and I would kind of say little like baby gibberish and he would be like, that's a very interesting point. So I don't remember. I feel very lucky to have been like steeped in that environment ever since I was literally in utero. So kind of everything about my upbringing just like awakened all of my creative cells to the arts.
That's great. So going so far back, it's like yeah. Even then, I had my statement, my baby gibberish. It's like that
Right.
work. It's not quite there.
Yeah.
That translation looks like.
Yeah. My little drawings when I was 3, my parents would look at them and be like, these are very good work, Mary. Maybe try using multiple colors in your shading to achieve a deeper tone. And when I would, as a 4-year-old, be like, okay, I'll try that.
It's always forward progression. It's like, the depth here. Oh man,
Yes, right. The
color.
composition, the form, the shapes.
It's great. It's great. I joke about there's a certain aesthetic one wears when they're around artists. Like I don't have them on, but I have tiny glasses and a big
Oh, yes.
turtleneck that I wear. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm dressed like a caricature. I look like
Mhm.
a character. Um, so for those who are undipped, like I said, I started off. I found out about you and kind of started diving in, and I was just really fortunate and happy that you replied back. And even wanting to do this podcast is in part because I became aware of your work, and I was just like, oh, let's dive in, let's see what's here. So for folks who are undipped and uninitiated, it's like to say it like that, seems a little bougie. Um, could you describe your work and walk us through your creative process and maybe taking on like a new piece of work, a new sort of body of work? I mean, you have sort of you have value test. I know that we're going to touch on in a bit, but at least want to start off there. Maybe you'll talk about that, but at least want to start off there about sort of, what your work is about and, walk through sort of the creative process, if you will.
Yeah, I'm a young artist. I'm an emerging artist. I graduated school pretty recently in 2022. So I'm still very much in that process of like figuring out what my own process is. I'm kind of guided by what I'm moved by. With value test, it very much began as just kind of like this strong urge to mm, kind of work out some of these um, thoughts and emotions I had been having about um, racism and colorism and sexism and classism, and trying to understand myself and introspect about my position as a Black woman, as a light-skinned Black woman, and as a biracial woman, and where I stood within the history of Black femininity.
Mhm.
So those works, I say this is the early stages of my career. This early work comes from a personal place, but I'm oriented towards history and I'm very much oriented towards these like broader social and historical ideas. As I was creating these value test paintings, I talked to friends, loved ones, and mentors about their own experiences with colorism, and particularly with the paper bag test. And
Yeah.
they were, these are all like kind of scholarly artist types, and they were, happy to recommend me reading material and, historical reference points. So I began like a research process. And now I've come to understand myself as like a research oriented artist. I'm thinking towards the future, and like I feel like I've opened up this deep well of curiosity about history and like and who we would have been then, and if we would have been then.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So in terms of my, yeah, I think the process is ongoing. It's like it's constantly replenishing the well of creativity just by like keeping my eyes open in the world.
Yeah.
Artists are, we're always looking and we're always absorbing and we're always everything, this might be cheesy, but everything is inspiration. That's the whole point, why we do what we do and how we do it. So, you know, the making and the research and the absorbing all kind of replenish the process.
Thank you. So I want to touch on now I'm just freestyling since, just it's one of those things where the observation, right? Like when I'm doing it, this is my artistic expression. I've been fighting hard to get it over as an artistic pursuit or what have you. And I find that, I'll have a notepad with me. I'll have something on hand that is like, this is an idea, or this is a series of questions, or this is maybe a conversation. And sometimes it shows up and it shows up in conversations and interviews, but sort of the references. I remember one that comes to mind where it felt hokey, it felt cheesy. I was just like walking, sweating my existence away in Texas, and I saw a bumper sticker, and
Mm-hmm.
it was something about art or creativity is the new magic. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I wonder about that. Is that legit? Let me think about that. Let me think about that. And it just sparked up this idea of how does one really dive into their work? When do they get hit with it? And sort of even the idea of the question of have you, just been out doing something that you didn't expect to get some sort of influence from or some sort of spark or creativity from, and then you can do that through line to, yeah, this absolutely showed up in this work. This absolutely was a reference point from here. And it started like it gave me like several questions. And I love those moments, those unexpected moments. Or even when I mentioned this actually yesterday to a friend that I went to a convention, and you know I was just there just to just kind of like reach out, network, and all of that stuff, and didn't think I was going to get anything out of it. And I ended up doing 7 interviews that connected almost in this sort of Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation
Mm-hmm.
sort of way. Do you have like, you said you're a young artist, but I don't young artists, that doesn't matter to me. Um, do you have like this is definitely an experience that I had that showed up in this piece of work or the thinking in this piece of work?
I am sure I have, but I can't point to any specifically. I think of it as like the primordial soup where, you know, everything is everything, as Miss Lauren Hill would say. Um, it's all, it all kind of appears in one way or another. Everything I've learned and everything I've seen.
It makes sense though when
Yeah.
we have those experiences, like specifically when we're looking at the idea of the paper bag test or what have you. And I had this conversation a while ago, and I realized I was doing it. It was just ingrained. I was doing this thing of like, I wonder if I would be treated differently if I was lighter or if I was darker, or sort of like where that fits. And I was thinking in that way. I generally don't think in that way, but it just hit me one day. And even this sort of thing, I try to, I do this, and I try to get this over as, hey, this is worthy of people's time. This is worthy of people's consideration. But I don't do this sort of, I'm the de facto Black person talking to Black artists and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I just say I'm talking to interesting folks. And I've encountered people who maybe don't look like you and I, who will throw out there, I don't know if this is black enough. And
Mm,
it makes me start questioning, I don't know if this is a black perspective. I was like, well, I'm black. I was like, what does that even mean? And
mhm,
I noticed that in doing this, and this happened not too recently, but long enough ago that I've been doing this, and I'm 5 years in of doing this particular podcast, and I would notice that my behavior would shift a little bit. I was just like, no, I'm definitely going to be talking to more black folks. I'm definitely going to be talking to more
mhm,
people that fit this and getting their perspectives because I encountered it. And I just do interviews.
mhm,
It's not like baked in my work in that way, but definitely it's much more prevalent, much more out there in my work and sort of how I approach this and who I even reach out to.
mhm,
So speaking on like the themes that show up in your work, right? Like sort of your approach, like how you approach the intersection of like race and identity. Like what impact or sort of like what response have you seen or are you looking for? Like what are your thoughts in that area as far as when folks encounter like your work, specifically value tests, what are you seeing? What are you hoping to see? Is it, hey, I want this to be a conversation that started. I want this to be a conversation that has sort of maybe this shade to it. Pardon the pun.
yes. I I'm deeply inspired. I think there is a movement occurring right now where artists are pulling from history and kind of activating audiences to tell these stories that were previously unknown or hadn't yet been unearthed. And I feel as though I'm part of that cohort of artists. So I was also like, as a child, surrounded by artists and social practice artists. I was brought up in an environment where art was always in service of the community.
Hmm.
As artists, we have these tools that we can facilitate people's sight and come up with these creative solutions to our problems. So this work, yeah, the hope was that it would spark a conversation, which is exactly what it did. And I was very happy that it did that because I was, concerned about the response and if people would think it was too fraught a conversation to have. But I found that so many Black people who came up to me after viewing the work had a story to tell me about their memories of their own families or about, occurrences that had happened recently. And they were these really beautiful stories
Yeah.
about these like instances of color and colorism. And that was almost everybody. So I was very moved by that response. And that is how I understood that, I, as an artist, my job was complete. Um, I only do 10%, and the audience, I only make the object, I can do the research, I can make the object, I can set up like a series of conditions for this level of introspection to occur. And if it occurs, that's great. Yeah.
That's good. It's really good. So speak to me about this. When you mention the ancestors, that's one thing that I saw that popped up a few times. Like, you know, is it a cyclical thing? Like, kind of looking in there with the research component you touched on earlier, like realizing like research is important and being able to really go back to maybe see what's here right in front of us because we always return to these things. It's never like, oh, this is the first time we've seen this. It's like, no, this the same idea, the same approach of how we're discussing certain things, but let me put maybe this perspective on it. Well, maybe let me approach it from my lens, or even incorporating sort of where we're at now in this conversation around sort of like maybe race, maybe classism, maybe where people fit in, like 2024. Talk about like sort of, in looking back and kind of looking back to look forward, I suppose, and how that relates to maybe speaking with ancestors. And I say this with this added context. Um, I've done interviews with folks of like various ages, right? And one that came up not too long ago. This was an artist, actually a filmmaker, and he's like 76, and I'm 39, and he was like, when I was doing my thing, you weren't around. So how would you? And I was just like, I don't know, man. It's the references. I see it because we keep returning to these things.
Mm-hmm.
And it like blew his mind. He was just like, you get it. You get it. So
Mm-hmm.
your perspective, young artist, but you're touching on things which we're here. So and I'm glad we were able to have this. So talk a bit about that as far as like looking back to maybe look forward or look to right now.
Mm. I think that's the whole point is, looking back in order to look forward. I'm very concerned about, you know, I mean, as human beings, we are only able to perceive time like moment to moment in the present, and we can imagine the future and we can imagine the past, but it's kind of frightening the way those stories can so easily be lost. But yeah, I think I would venture to say that in the United States and in the West, there is a there is a vested interest in people not remembering correctly. But there are ways that we can remember. Um, yeah, and I think it's critical that we contextualize ourselves as a old species of people
Mm.
with if we want to have a harmonious relationship with each other and the planet moving forward.
That's a good point. No, I like it. I like it. You had the look on your face. You're a heady person. I like the way that you think. It's it's good because I find like we were doing things that are, let's say, archival in nature, and you're right. Like I do these interviews and I have these different folks and I'm capturing this like, hey, this was my work 2 years ago. This is my work maybe 2 years from now. And it's just like this is what I was thinking at this point. I'm like, I'm glad we were able to document it. And because
Mm,
I think if we get rid of that or those stories aren't considered as important or those stories are somehow suppressed, and here we've had I'll use your terms because I like it, this sort of vested interest and folks that are from underrepresented communities, their
mhm,
stories being represented, their ideas, their insights being documented. And
mhm,
I think when we have work that's sharing those stories, whether it be something like this or whether it be someone that's like capturing the stories and taking those stories and turning it into a visual, turning it into something that transcends and extends past sort of this moment in time, I think it's important. And I just find it interesting at times that we're not doing that, and then wonder why certain things are lost, and we have these moments where it's unearthed. We finally
mm,
found it. We have this. Oh my God! It was this behind the scenes. We didn't know this existed. It existed. It was just suppressed. So as we go back in, I want to tap back in um, onto value tests and more so about sort of like sort of the scope component, like how many pieces and that sort of stuff. Some of the more technical things in there, because I realized I'm looking at the question, I was like, I didn't even cover that.
Oh, yeah. Um, well, right now there's 12 pieces in the series, but I'm expanding it to 24. Um, I I'd like it. ideally it'd be more of a limited series, but I'm finding as I do more, I'm kind of proceeding with a little bit more intention.
Yeah.
The first iteration was just kind of, it came from like an internal place, like a kind of an automatic place.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't think there's much control you can have over your what you've got to do as an artist and what you've got to make. But maybe in the second iteration, I've like grabbed the reins just a little bit and I'm trying to understand what I'm doing.
So it's constant learning that in it. You touched on earlier, sort of the research component. You touched on sort of just kind of figuring out like you have, like that initial 12. This is
Mm-hmm.
here. And then
Right, right, right.
taking from that initial 12, how do you feel like maybe that next 12, this is the 24, like maybe what, and it feels gauche to say it, but what would you maybe do different, or what would you be curious about applying to that next sort of grouping, whether it be something from a technical component, whether it be something from, well, I want to do this, I want to play with colors here. And by the way, before I forget, you capture the browns very well. I always talk about when folks capture, because sometimes it's done.
Yeah,
Shout out to you.
that's the project. As representational, figurative Black artists, we got to capture the brown correctly. We got to do it justice. Yeah. Um, but yes, moving forward, well, I'm thinking about these ideas of the binary, like the paper bag test is a binary. You either pass or fail,
Hmm.
and how it harkens all the way back to the invention of race, and that, and that hierarchical system, which is a set of binaries. Um, so I'm really thinking about those systems. Um, and I'm trying to bring in some other elements. I'm thinking about like class presentation. Um, I'm there's so many unknowns
Yeah.
with this work. I had created these. I designed these portraits. These are fictional characters. I created these digital collages and I invented new people essentially to paint.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of control over how these women look.
Yeah.
So with that, why have I chosen to? Why have I chosen these women? Um, why have I chosen to that they represent themselves in this way? And like, what specific elements can I bring in that highlight certain aspects of history? Like with a new work that I'm doing, or two new works, um, I used a like bolder approach with my colors. The previous 10 had just been the paper bag against kind of like a abstracted color field.
Yeah.
The next two, there's one that's where the bag and the background have both been painted black. And the one after that, they've both been painted white. So I want to think about what all that means. Like the one on white, the obvious choice would have been to paint, somebody who was white passing, quote unquote. Like, oh, well, even though she chose to pass, she still will never be white enough. But that's like a story with an end, that doesn't leave any room for interpretation.
Right.
So instead, I'm painting somebody else with kind of like a little bit more age, a little more experience, and she's wearing a tignon, which is a traditional Louisiana Creole headdress, and it's like connected to these like old sumptuary laws. I have to do a little more research about how Black Creole women had to cover their hair. So, and then I'm thinking about like the color white as it has, cultural associations globally. In West Africa, the color white is it's a spirit color or a death color, I believe. So I am trying to create more opportunities for more interpretation. And always always posing questions and not attempting to answer my own question conceptually, if that makes sense.
It does. So I got like one more real, well, two. I got two more questions, and they're both real questions. And then I get into those rapid fire questions that you were terrified of, but probably forgot about. They're still coming. So could you share with us sort of these other instances where in generally I would ask, like, what is your first love creatively, because you're in so many disciplines, and I see how they connect. So speak about that, like the advantages again of working in so many mediums, finding that sort of right tool for the right job, but sort of what that first love was, and like how do they connect? Maybe does one, does being a does being a singer, a vocalist, or have you help you with portraiture? Are there any sort of like overlaps in that way, maybe in the thinking? But speak on that a bit.
Yes, there is overlap. Um, but at this point, there's still a lot of unknowns with my own practice. All I can say is that it all comes from the same creative location. Um, and I envision a future where they like intersect.
Yeah.
But I think right now I'm kind of in a painting zone creatively, so I'm thinking about image making, and I'm pretty focused on like 3D or 2D media at the moment. But I have done performance work in the past. During COVID, I did a piece called Serenade, where I sang in different areas around my neighborhood in San Francisco because everyone was under lockdown and people would open their windows. And then I was kind of incorporating those like kind of improvised classical vocal elements into some video installation that I did, kind of bringing song into like and projecting it against a painting. But yeah, I think, like I said before, the concept always drives the execution. So all the stuff in me is like, revving up to something, but I'm waiting for those ideas to come through.
I like it. So this is the last question, and I like this question because as a person who, yeah, a little bit, overachiever. I like it. I'm a little jealous. I'm very impressed. I'm a little jealous. Just like I barely do this, and you're doing everything, and it's like, I'm curious. I'm just exploring, and I'm researching as well. I'm sure there's like 4 or 5 things that you didn't even include. That it's like, oh, I did this for a while as well. So when I go out, I'm thinking through like goals. Like I want to talk to this many people. I want to feel like we have this sort of goal, this metric thing. How many interviews have you done? How many podcasts have you put out? How many, folks have you talked to? So how do you do you have sort of like creative goals? And I know you were kind of touching on it a little bit as far as you want to do 12 more of this sort of body of work, but
Mhm.
have, creative goals. How do you approach them? And do you get bummed if you kind of like fall short? Like for instance, all right, let's say you get 22 instead of 24 or what have you. Would you be like, damn it? Or is it like, yeah, I'll probably do 36? What does that look like for you when it comes to creative goals?
I don't. I used to feel a little bummed out, but I mostly because, in the past when I was a child, I would kind of like get frustrated, put something down, and then I would like never return to it. But like I actually would come back to it. I would come back to it the next year or in a couple months. And I would try it again, with new knowledge, I would find that I would get a little bit further. So I always like those moments of frustration and not achieving a goal. I just see it as like a hiatus time. Like I need to put this down and if I come back to it, I come back to it. I kind of listen to the what it's trying to tell me. In terms of professional goals and career goals and deadlines and things like that, those are a different story. But I try not to put too much pressure on myself. Like I tend to be an overachiever anyway. So it's like, if I don't do everything I set out to do, it's still going to be pretty good, you know? So.
Okay, just pat yourself on the back a little bit, gas yourself up. I like it.
Yeah, it'll be fine. That's my big phrase. It'll be fine.
I thank you. Is I like I'm an overachiever a little bit, I don't know. But it's one of those things where it's driven by something else. I call it like sort of riding this wave, like,
Yeah.
I'm doing it because I'm an Aquarius too. That's another thing that's sitting there too, just,
Mhm.
but when I talk with folks, I'm like in this sort of spot of doing the education work is very new to me. And it's like, oh, this is attention, this is credibility, and this notion of always
Mm.
having to be on. And, it's just like, oh, well, this is temporary. And like, how does this fit? And does this make sense? And it's not a goal per se that I thought I would have. It's like, this sort of, it feels a little opaque, but it's like, oh, I'm doing something else. This is growing in this way, not an expected way, but it's growing in a different way. And I can see it serving me being a maybe better podcaster or a better interviewer or better at even articulating an idea, like in speaking to an audience of people who have no idea from a technical standpoint how to do certain things and be able to say it in sort of jargon laden, but also be able to bring it down to a level that is relatable. I'm like, I can see that connecting in conversations like this,
Mhm.
and it's something about it. And sure, in spending time and setting apart like time to do those classes, to prepare for those classes and so on, I could do a number of podcasts and it kind of takes me away from the chief
Mm.
thing. But in the overall scope, the more macro side of things, it's moving me towards that goal. And maybe I don't do an extra 10 or 20 interviews in a year. And I like the way that you put it. It's like, I'll just get back to it. I think I've done a lot. And, you know, there was one year in this where I put out 300 episodes. It was a
Mhm.
pandemic year. We were inside because, I'm
Yeah.
always next to the computer, but
Mhm.
it's still that thing. And I just like that you kind of giving yourself like that reality check. Like you get a lot done, it's like,
Yeah.
I'll come back to it. And it's also, I think, knowing like this is something that's of interest for me and I'll come back to it if I'm still interested in it later.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we got the real stuff.
Yes.
Now it's time to get to the fake stuff.
Oh, okay.
It's not the fake stuff. Some people call these the BS questions, and I don't call them that because I actually write these questions. Um, but I got some rapid fire questions for you. You have to run a little
Okay.
rapid fire with me. Okay.
All right. All right.
All right. So here's the first. I'm gonna get the one that you might have had on your mind out of the way already. Do you have a favorite piece of Philadelphia slang?
John, for
That was
sure.
that was instantaneous.
Because a former classmate of mine from Philadelphia put in her Instagram bio, she, her, John, because it reflects the versatility of the word, It's like it refers to anyone and anything. She, her, John. I love that.
This is good. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. That's good. Um, do you have a favorite movie?
Favorite movie? Oh, The Fifth Element.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
that's a good one. We may have to talk about that a little bit further post pod because I might have done a Fifth Element podcast.
Whoa.
Yes, yes.
It's a very special movie. It just like it's so unique and so out there, and there's so much to love about it. It's one of my favorites.
I did it at a radio station with a guy that does he's a host and he does a regular anniversary like screening of the movie and he dresses up as Chris Tucker's character.
Mm,
Yes.
yeah.
It works.
hmm
um so let me guess. What historical figure would you love to have a dine with? There's a part B to this question, but I'd like to at least give that part. You're going through the whole index
To
right now. It's like
dine
everyone in
with.
history.
Oh man, Mansa Musa, I guess.
Okay. So here's the part B to it. This would be a little trolly because of who you chose. Like who's picking up the bill? No. What are you guys gonna eat? What's the meal? Like,
Ooh.
yeah.
Well, if I remember correctly, I think he was a king. So they would be cooking up all kinds of like ancient roasted meats and things like that. I'm going to be honest. I was kind of like, I went through the entire Rolodex of history and I settled on like the ancient civilizations of Africa. And I was like, okay, I think they seemed pretty cool. Good food, beautiful jewelry. Yeah.
I almost saw the processing of the Rolodex and you were like,
Yeah.
I saw it. So here's the last one. So, I think we all have these different hobbies, these different things that we're into that, based on maybe conversations or sort of the public persona, we like to delve deep. We have these hobbies that people may not think that, oh, I'm really into that. I'm really, that's a real big interest of mine. I've said it on here before and people don't think it's true. I really enjoy wrestling and like 80s pop music. Like, if you would have saw me earlier, some of the dance movements or lack of dance movements I was doing to this playlist that I had my AirPods on, you'd be surprised. A man of my size, 6'4", 250, just getting it. So what is maybe a surprising hobby or interest of yours that, you might want to divulge? Not to go into great detail about it. It's like, look, I'm into this, moving on.
I really enjoy D&D podcasts.
I did not expect that. So that was a super effective question and a super effective answer. So shout out to you on that.
Now it's out there for everyone to know, but it's not a secret.
Look, that algorithm. You're going to be invited on a number of those podcasts.
I sure hope not.
I'm gonna tag it. When I put this episode, I'm just gonna tag it. So that's kind of it for the hot seat. Well, the rapid fire, not the hot seat, rapid fire. So there's two things I would like to do as we close out here, right? One, I want to thank you for making the time. I'm glad we were able to get on here and have a conversation about your insights around like your work and on your work. And also, I want to give you the space and opportunity to share, sort of social media websites, sort of the shameless plug portion of it. And I do call it shameless plug. So if you will, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. My Instagram is mary.graham.art. And there's a link to my website on there. I believe I have a show coming up in the fall at the Berkeley Art Center, curated by Hannah Waiters and Charles Lee. And I'll be posting about that as more details come out. And I hope that's it. I hope I haven't missed anything. But thank you again so much. This was really wonderful.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Mary Graham for coming on and spending some time and sharing a bit of her story with us. And I am Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.